I think we can start. We're going to start with several moments of silence, and I will break the silence at the end. Okay, thank you everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Goldener. I'm the new president of the club, and I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for coming to the celebration of Bob's life. Bob was a giant in the history of this club. He had a lot of the things that you see here, courts 4, 5, and 6, a lot of the expansion we've done, the excellent condition of the lawns, all had Bob's fingerprints all over them. When I first joined the club, Bob was no longer president. He was the second president of the club after Jackie and before Hans. When I first joined the club, Bob was no longer president, but I played with him on the courts all of the time. And I would be out playing in a doubles game with him, and suddenly Bob would just disappear. He would leave, and several minutes later he would reappear on the courts carrying a bucket of soapy water, and in the middle of the game he would be walking around the courts pouring soapy water on mole crickets. Towards the end, Bob still came, he played doubles, and then finally started playing with a partner playing doubles, so he'd play every other shot only on the yellow ball. And after he stopped playing, he still was here every day, keeping the board, or sometimes just sitting here. So we sleeping sometimes in the shade. But this club thrives on its volunteers, and Bob has a huge presence in that. So we all owe Bob a big debt of gratitude, and we miss you, Bob, and love you. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Nancy Lentz, who has kindly agreed to join us today.
It was about, can you hear me? Yeah. It was about 6 months ago, I said to Bob, what do you want in your passing? Because I'm just always talking. Everybody knows what I want. And he said, I think I would like to see the whole Croquet group at one sitting. And you gave it to him. Thank you all for doing this and being here. It was really great. I know he loved croquet, and he loved everybody here. You don't realize he had been very ill for 3 years, and the past 2 years were hard, and particularly the last 6 months, and then the last month. He got to the point, well, 2 years ago, he couldn't drive here. Well, he could drive here. He couldn't drive anywhere else without getting lost. So he was always able to come here. He was not going to lose that at all. He just, in the end, when he couldn't do anything, he would get up in the morning, put on his lights, whether it was croquet day or not, and he would manage to get here. I don't know what he did when he got here. So he'd be gone for an hour and a half. And he would come back and spend the rest of the day just sleeping or sitting on the couch. So he had been going downhill. So it wasn't as sudden as you all thought. And then on a Saturday, he fell between the bathroom and the bedroom and broke his pelvic bone. And they don't operate on that. He then ended up in Venice Hospital for 4 days. Um, Before he passed, he was unable to swallow. And of course, by then, his legs were weak anyway. They're totally giving out. He was in a lot of pain. So it was hard. He would ended up living in a nursing home. And he was too good a person for this. So when I had the phone call on the 15th, I went in at 6 in the morning, and he passed at 10. So I was very, very happy for him because to move him hurt, and he had to be moved to hospice. And I did not want that for him. I did not want him to live the rest of his life in a nursing home. And I couldn't visit because of COVID. Even in the hospital, I could only be there 2 to 6. So that was the ending story. I do have a funny story. One day, 2 days before he passed, I went into the hospital and he said, "Nancy, go get my shoes. My feet hurt." "Why do your feet hurt?" "Because I was cleaning the porta potties in my bare feet and there were stones. So you had your porta potties cleaned right before he died." Thank you for coming.
Close.
Right. For those, I think everybody knows who I am, but if you don't, I'm Jackie Jones.
Got to be close.
I'm Jackie Jones.
There we go.
All right. I'm the founder and first president of the club. Hey, Ann. I have to write things down or I get too nervous to speak, so. Talk about Bob. Bob was involved in the club almost from the day we opened.
Jackie, close.
Almost from the day we opened. And he learned the game. He loved croquet. He learned the game very fast. He was invaluable to me. And he came out, and he was here every day. Fred and I were. From the very beginning, he was here. Fred, I started with beginner clinics. He worked with me. He studied what I did, and he very quickly took over the beginner clinics. And he did a wonderful job. He made it fun for people, and that's what we're all about, is having fun. And they came back under his tutelage. And instead of saying quiet, when people were making noise, he had a very, I will say, affectionate way of saying, "Shut up." And he got reaction. People kept quiet. Anyway, Fred and Bob worked, Nancy mentioned this. They worked very close and both were invaluable to getting the extra chords. Bob was with Fred the whole way and Fred was with Bob the whole way. They were a wonderful team. They loved each other, worked well together, and they understood each other, whatever that means. Bob was an integral part of the success and the structure of the club as it is today. As I said, he became very involved with legalese, helped us out of a whole bunch of stuff, and he didn't mind sharing all of that, and he just was invaluable to Fred and me. And he will be sadly missed. He's an icon, like Fred is, to the Croquet Club. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Okay, I know there's a lot of people that have stories. Frank has a bunch, but I told him he can't tell them all. But why don't people, if anybody has a story that they'd like to share with us about Bob, please come up.
Let me talk first.
Okay.
What am I, invisible?
Yes.
My name's Mark Claff, if you don't know me. I moved down to Florida with my wife in 2010. She had played down here for about 3 years for about a month at a time. But I refused to come to Florida because I grew up over in Stewart for a while. But we finally moved down, and she got me over here, and I met Bob. And Bob was always doing something. The first thing he did every day was to go out and kill old crickets. But he was doing everything else too. He was the mechanic, and he was the carpenter. So he was doing everything. He recruited me early on. He taught me how to run the roller. He taught me how to do other things. And so we got to be pretty close. One of the things that everybody's mentioned, and it's very important, he was the attorney behind the club for the expansion for the 3 new courts that we had, and it took a lot of time. And he was an excellent lawyer, and he didn't let anything pass by him. He was also very funny. Sometime in 2013-14, the state had senior games that we were invited to participate in. So Fred and Jackie were running the Croquet senior games. First ones were down in Estero, and then up in Clearwater. And so Fred recruited Bob and me to help work on the senior courts. We had to set up the courts, and we had to go up early. And one of the benefits was that we got comped hotel rooms, some obscure hotels. And but Bob and I were roommates for 4 years during this time. And I remember, I think it was in Largo, we were checking in. Jackie and Fred had gotten us down there. I followed Fred, and we got into the hotel. And Jackie and Fred went to registration and registered. And Fred and I went up, and I said, we're under Lentz and Class. Bob piped up, we haven't got married yet. And the woman doing the registration didn't make any thought, didn't even look up. So she finished, and she said, if you thought I was going to be surprised, she said, you have no idea what I am. So, and he always had some funny things to say, and he always started AA with, quiet! So, he was a great guy, and I loved him.
Hi, my name is Russ Cucci. I'm a board member, and I'm just not going to be redundant with all the things that everyone else is saying. So I'm going to talk about a personal dream I had with Bob that I've told him several times. In early years, he would get here before me no matter what time I got here. And I said to him, and this is true, I had a dream that he lived in the clubhouse. He had 7 suits in there, maybe from his lawyer days. And I would rib him because he would always come out of the clubhouse, be here before anybody. And I loved Bob. We had a great time, great sense of humor. And thank you.
I'm Nancy Cooper, and I'm speaking for my husband, Miles Cooper. Can't hear you. I'm Nancy Cooper. I'm speaking for my husband, Miles Cooper, who was unable to come today.
he wanted me to tell you about his incident with Bob. As we all know, Bob had a very unusual sense of humor. Before we arrived down here, we were living in South Carolina, so he got the number of the club and called up. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm interested in your club. And he said, we're going to be moving down to Florida as soon as we can. So, we live in Aiken, South Carolina, and we're members of the Green Boundary Club. We play out here. Mr. Lentz, it's nice talking to you. He said, I'll call you when I get down there. So when we finally arrived down here a month or so later.
Close, Nancy, close.
Closer?
Eat it.
When we finally arrived down here a month or so later, he called, we came up here and he said, now, who is Mr. Lentz? So somebody pointed him out and we went over there and he said, Mr. Lentz, he said, I talked to you on the phone a month or so ago, and he said, we're so delighted to finally be down here and join the club. And Bob's response was, you're on probation for 6 months.
Okay, others. Okay, can you make it up here, Chris? You want?
I only do this because I have a tendency to trip in front of important people. I did right here. We had all our doctors. I mean, you were one of them.
You can sit on the edge.
The whole, yeah, I'll
sit on that table.
And for everybody that's speaking, keep the microphone close. It's easier to hear.
Well, I don't need a microphone because I'm known to speak loudly. And Bob knew that because he heard Jackie tell me, keep it down, keep quiet. So I'm not going to tell all the things about Bob that have to do with this club. All I can tell you is that Russ and I were in the first class. And we used to be here very early. And then eventually Bob came and Russ was doing things. And Bob and I were here first and in the morning. And we opened it up. So the first thing was check our porta potties and make sure they were open and make sure that they were cleaned as properly. So then we came back here, and what we did and what made Bob a good friend of mine was that we were so early we didn't have to do anything right away. So we'd pull up a couple chairs. If it was nice, we'd sit out in front of the clubhouse, and if it was cold or rainy, we'd go inside and stay out of the wind or the rain and talk. But we didn't talk very much about croquet, except the dealings that Bob was doing with the city of Venice and the county of Sarasota. Because virtually every day he had to go to some meeting in those places. So I got to know who he was seeing and some things about who was helping us and who was against us at the various meetings. I didn't know any of them. But we would talk about a lot of things. Well, Bob was an interesting guy. I don't have to tell you, he was an attorney. And we got to talking one day because we both had different lives before croquet. And one thing came up, and I'm not sure who brought it up, but back in 1964, there was a movement in Mississippi, and a group of volunteers, about 700 of them, went basically from Midwest colleges and universities down to help register voters. Well, we had something in common in that, only that I was alive in 1964, but I also knew one of the 3 civil rights workers that was murdered. He lived behind my elementary school, and we also knew each other from that. Not that we were in the same grade, he was older, but I knew him because I used to have to walk my bike up the hill. It was too steep, and he'd be out for his walk. We also went to the same high school. So I happened to mention it, or it came up. Well, Bob told me about going down there. It was one of his really interesting things that he did in his life. Because he was I believe he was in law school. I believe one of the places was Meridian, Mississippi, where a lot of the issues came from. So we talked about how things that we did were related, and we talked a lot. I'll say this. I have a word that I think of when I talk about Bob's humor. He had an acerbic sense of humor. He heard Jackie tell me to keep quiet, and Bob would, I was all the way across doing something, he'd yell at me to keep quiet. He could hear me. So we were friends, and we could talk about a lot of things, and we didn't gossip about people, but we talked about our lives and what was going on, and I knew pretty much everything that was going on with the club and why we needed these changes and the expansion. One of the most annoying things that we ever had to do here was put strings out. And we used to look at the weather and say, well, you think it's going to rain? You think we're going to have anything? Because when we had 3 courts, there were days we had to have 6 half courts to get everybody who wanted to learn in a class, and also because golf croquet was becoming popular, and we needed all the courts to put the people in as the club grew. So that was a job that he and I did. I couldn't keep up with Bob. He was the one who climbed down the little hills, I say out in Pine Brook Avenue and everything, and take one end of the string, and sometimes he'd be there untangling strings. And then he was the man that every time they mowed or did something, we'd lose the holes for the courts where the wickets went. And Bob had it in his head, all the measurements. And I used to complain to him, why do we have to measure this with a tape measure? I'll just walk it out. He insisted that it be correct. So he paid a lot of attention. He was a detailed person. He knew what he was up to. He had his plans. We talked about the importance of having a strategy, because a big part of croquet is strategy, and a big part of being an attorney is strategy, and the jobs and things that I did was strategy, so they all fit. And I was so glad for the years that we talked every day. First, Russ and I played for a couple years and learned. We went right from, we didn't know anything. We relied on everybody else, and we learned. After a while, Mark showed up. So Mark became sort of a third person, and we'd always bring out an extra chair now, and we talked. Mark was great because Bob would notice all the little things that weren't right, and Mark would notice all the little things that weren't right, and between the two of them, they would get these things done. So the time put in by Bob wasn't just here. He was here early, and he would check it late at night if things were going on, make sure nobody was out here misusing the place. We had an early occasion when football players came out here and played, and it was old grass, but they put dents in this court that you wouldn't believe. But these things, because it was a problem, he checked, and he kept track of all of the things. So the time he put in wasn't just time that you would think having the board meeting, being president. It was all the running around over the county and dealing with everybody that came here from the county or the city, and the safety people and the repair people. So it went way beyond what we think we see. So I miss Bob. I was upset when I got the notice. The way it comes, you see a name on the email, and right away, I know I don't want to go any further. But that's the way we are. We're coming out here, we're having fun with a game that for a lot of us is brand new in our lives. But it's an important part of our lives. Lastly, I want to thank Jackie, because I used to ride by here when they were planning this whole 3 courts. And I would ride by, and I just lived 2 blocks away. So between Bob and Russ and myself, we were about the 3 closest people here. But I would drive by and I'd go ask my wife, what's going on? What do you think is going on over there? She said, why don't you ask somebody? So one day I see 2 people standing there in a little white car, or station wagon, and I don't know who these people are, but I walk up, it happened to be Jackie and Fred. So I got the whole explanation of what was going on, and I also got an application, and was in the very first class, along with Russ and Barbara, and I don't know who else was there. They might raise their hand, but some of them aren't
We
around.
had a total of maybe, 10 players at the beginning?
Yeah. And we just put the court up and we play, and if there were other players here because they came down from Sarasota, anytime there was a question, that's how we learned the rules. Lastly, Bob was a very smart man. He learned the rules. He always knew the rules, and we would talk, and I would ask Bob a lot of times, because he was the second friend here with the rules. So he was the rules maker. He was my friend, and he was a great person here for our club, and we will miss him.
Thank you. Matt.
Pretty close.
Bob and I were good friends, and when I say we were good friends, we enjoyed croquet together. A year ago at this time, there were four of us, myself, Mark Claff, Dick Schleider, and Bob. We owned the third court at 8 o'clock in the morning. That was our fun time. Bob, as they have said, has always been the yellow ball guy. He was very quiet, just a very pleasant guy who enjoyed spending your time with him. He never had a bad word to say. And if you got out of line a little bit, and I'll just give this as an example, I got a little annoyed at someone and raised my voice. I came back and Bob was looking at me. He didn't say anything. And the next morning I came back and I said, Bob, I apologize to that person and now I'm apologizing to you. And he was always very gracious in that way. He was never nasty with anybody. He was always a gentleman. What was the things I remember about Bob, and I honestly forgot the Mississippi thing. I was stationed in Mississippi in 1954 during all the mess that was going on down there at that time. When I was in Greenville, Mississippi. It was the heart of the Delta, the cotton fields right along the Mississippi River. If you were black at that time, it was a terrible time. You virtually had no rights and nobody would stand up for you. To know somebody that actually went down there and lived through that when he was in college, you have to take your hat off to a man like that, and I do and I did. Other than that, we enjoyed each other's company. As I say, we had the third court. The thing I always teased Bob about, as you know, if you play 6 wicket, you're in groups. You have championship, first flight, and that type of thing. Well, it happened in 1917. I was in a tournament here and I won first flight. And I used to tease Bob. 2000, what did I say? 2000. But anyhow, so 2018, Bob again played in a tournament in the first flight. Bob played 8 games, won 7, and won that tournament. So guess who got teased then? And I know he's up there smiling about that now. And someday I hope I'm up there smiling with him and we're enjoying the green grass up there. Thank you, Bob.
I just have a little short thing to tell you. I had a nickname for Bob. I had met him 10 years ago, and he wasn't always sweet all the time. Sometimes I caught his grumpiness. So I used to call him the Squire. And whenever I called him the Squire, he would get this big grin on his face. Because squires were a special name for very special lawyers. And to have Bob Lentz here, a Philadelphia lawyer, which was the epitome of the lawyer you could hire in the U.S. when I was growing up. So anytime I played with him, I would whisper in his ear, "You better watch it, because I'm playing with the Philadelphia lawyer, the Squire."
That marks the spot. So I'm Ellen Goldener. I'm a relatively new member. I
in comparison to many of you here. When I first joined the club, I was a little afraid of Bob. He, until I figured out that he was joking, or at least partly joking. I remember coming to our lessons in the morning, coming off of Siesta Key. Sometimes the bridge was up, but I also run a little late, so it was a bad combination, and I was late for the class. I got, in the line, and he said, "Where were you?" I said, "Well, the bridge went up." He said, "Well, don't let it happen again." And the other thing is, God forbid you should ever leave one of those boxes open during the day. Oh my God. What's the matter with you? But I'm going to tell just a somewhat poignant story about Bob. I started playing with him a lot about a year ago. Many of us did. I know Sue was over there, and we would often share the yellow ball because he didn't always have the strength to be able to play singles. He was happy, to have, even in doubles, he was happy to share a ball. One day, he started choking. And, he couldn't breathe. Mac was there, and I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do. Sue, I think, was here on the middle court. We went running over to John, who was on the last court, to say, come, help us do something. And by the time John got back, he had coughed up whatever it was that he was choking on. And Mac said, "Thank God! I thought I was going to have to give you mouth to mouth." Jane Koziol, and this is just somewhat poignant, Nancy, said, "Gosh, we all knew. Bob would come out and he'd often have to sit for 10 minutes before he could stand up again, but he came every day and played when he could." But Jane Koziol, who's a nurse, witnessed that episode, and she said to me afterwards, "Does he have a DNR?" And I'm like, "How would I know? I don't know." So a few days later, I think Sue and I were sitting with him down there, and we just came out and asked him, "Do you have a DNR?" He said, "No, I don't." So we said, "Well, so if the EMT people come, we should let them do their thing, right?" And he said, "Yeah, right." So we said, "Well, do you think you would ever?" He said, "You know what? I think I'll be ready for that. I'll be ready in about a year." And it's just been a year.
Ann.
I'm Ann Kukla. I thought I was going to say something original this morning. I wrote it down, and I'm going to say it anyway because it fills in some important gaps. Nancy, I wonder what Bob was like in his heyday, because in his 80s he was spectacular.
Always was.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is impossible to overstate the amount of hard work and extent of his contribution to our club. I would like to present one telling statistic from a seemingly minor task which you will recognise, which was not minor. Bob and I bonded over mole crickets. We celebrated every 2-inch yellowish and opaque corpse. They surface under tiny mounds of dirt, but underneath the tunnels are maybe 2-inch deep, 1 inch wide, so it was a big deal. Here are the directions. You pour 3/4 of a cup of detergent into a gallon container, fill it with water, avoid the suds. It takes half a gallon of water for the first offence, and it takes 1/4 cup of follow-up detergent for any future offender. This could only be done early in the morning before those little mounds of dirt were squashed by mowing. Bob usually started before 8 o'clock and finished by 9 before any clinics. This campaign took maybe 12 to 15 gallons of detergent, probably 5 days a week for several months each season. I reckon Bob easily and personally dispensed at least 500 gallons of detergent every year before most of us had even left the house. This man accomplished so many tasks so well, and I want to yell and scream and celebrate with no personal fanfare. I admire and miss Bob so much.
Hi, Roger Vorber. I can remember when I first became a member, the first classes I come to, we started taking lessons here and went to make a wicket, made the wicket, picked up the clip, put it in my pocket. And Bob looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're going to take that thing home?" That was the kind of sense of humor that Bob had, and I just loved it. And I'm going to miss him dearly. I can remember one time we're playing together, and I was in a position where I could make a jump shot. Of course, Bob taught me how to make one. And I finally made it. And then he looked at me and said, "Roger, this is what?" He says, "How come you don't make it when you're playing with me?" So I'm going to miss him dearly.
More stories. Hans, did you want to say something? And John, I think we can probably fire up the grill if you haven't.
Yeah, I think all the funny stories on Bob have already been taken, so. But, yeah, Bob was very important in my life here and in the club. He was probably trying to wash his hands of his job as the president when I came on, and I was really looking for someone to show me what to do. And I wasn't living we weren't living in Venice yet. We were still living up in Tampa. I had a full-time job, and Bob really wanted to get someone new in there. So he said, "Listen, I'll do all the work. You just got to agree to do it and do what I tell you to do." And I said, "That would be great." He did that for quite a while. It was really good. And Bob was so organized, and I really appreciate it. And even until this day, everything that were kind of bigger decisions for the club and wanted input on, I always ran it by Bob, because Bob would give you, the direct answer. Somebody said that Bob was a gentleman, how he talked. I wouldn't quite put it that way. I'd say Bob was very direct, and you knew what was on his mind. It didn't take a lot of words. But I really respected our relationship, and he gave a lot of his time, experiences, and help over the last 5 or 6 years. So he's going to be greatly missed. I knew that he was in poor health really since the hurricane. I think when he got that influenza from that point. And we kind of had a little thing. I'd see him every morning, and I'd say, "How you doing?" And he'd say, "I'm here." And one day I won't be. Now, he only said that one time. From that point forward, we just at some point, it was coming. But he's going to be greatly missed and finally remembered. So, Bob, rest in peace. Thank you.
Other stories.
My name is Dick Wigton. My wife Barb and I, we're the other end of the spectrum. We've only been here for 5 months. We came down from the Oaks when we started building our court. And I have to tell you that Bob made an immediate impression on us, just sitting in his rocking chair. It was a very meaningful first few encounters. We get down here at 7:45 in the morning to set up our wickets and play, and he'd already be here sitting there. And I'd say, "Bob," after 3 or 4 times of doing this, seeing him there, I'd say, "Bob, do you sleep here?" And he'd say, "Yes." And so we became fast friends in a strange kind of way. We didn't exchange a lot of commentary, pleasantries with each other, but we saw in him a crustiness, but also he had a twinkle in his eye. And he really impacted us. Just getting to know him for a very short time, he impacted us. When we leave and go back to the Oaks, we think of Bob when we think of the Croquet Club down here. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. It's just how we got to know him, how we read him for a very short time, but a very important guy in our lives for a short time. Rest in peace, Bob.
Any other stories? I have one quick last one that you have. I remember a tournament probably 2 years ago. Well, we didn't have tournaments last year. 3 years ago, where Bob was in a tournament and wasn't feeling well, went home, and the next day, Bob wasn't here. And everybody said, "Where's Bob? He's in the hospital. He has congestive failure." It's like, oh no. And everybody felt awful. And I think somebody else filled in for him that day. The following day, we're out here, in walks Bob. I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "They gave me Lasix, and I'm back." So you just couldn't keep him down. I want to thank everybody. This, as I said in the beginning, Bob was really a giant and a big, important man to this club. And Nancy, he means a lot to all of us, as I know he does to you. So I want to thank everybody for coming here today and celebrating his life. And that'll be the end of the formal remarks. And I think John and Dean have lunch just about ready, so we can start our barbecue. Yeah, one.
We need to have help bringing the tables back in and putting the chairs back together.
Okay, if you can't hear Ellen, we need help moving these chairs out and moving the tables back in. If everybody chips in, we can do it pretty quickly. Thank you all. Thank you.